My name's Bond. James Bond.
We know that George Lazenby has recently announced he is retiring from, well, everything. No more roles, no more appearances, no more interviews, no more autographs, nothing. We like George Lazenby as Bond and as a very interesting personality that really enhanced the James Bond community worldwide. So today, we want to salute George Lazenby for his contributions to the world of James Bond through his solo performance as Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Hats off to George. And to help us along with this, we have back Mike Reyes, the senior movie contributor at cinemablend.com. Welcome back, Mike. It's always fun to hang with you, and it was great to meet you in person at the latest Gatherall in New Jersey.
Absolutely.
Oh, that did happen, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Dan, Tom, it's first of all, lovely to be back on spymovienavigator.com.
Thank you.
Lovely to have met you in person. And for my wife to have met you both in person, because for the folks at home, while I was online waiting for an autograph with Rachel Grant, my wife was off in another part of Gatherall, and then she met these two lovely gents here. Sincerely, just sweet, sweet moments. And it was good to be talking with you guys again, because we've been trying to get something together.
So today we're going to talk about George Lazenby, but first I want to give a couple of shout outs to some of the folks who provided feedback on our latest podcast episodes. We love getting feedback from you guys, so thank you very much. Big shout out to Jim Phelps, Aaron Krudup, and
Uncle Fabs, because it looks like they might be of German origin, because Uncle, it looks like the spelling of uncle in German.
Uncle Fobs 6408 for their positive comments on our Hogan's Heroes episode, and a shout out to Eric Seabury and Habathy Films for their positive comments on our How to Make a Spy Movie episode. Thank you.
Ooh, how do you make a spy movie?
We got 15 elements we brought out in that one. It's been one of our most popular ones. Actually, Habathy Films here, they're actually producing a spy movie right now in Canada.
Ooh.
And so they said, oh, this was fantastic. So
Reminds me of the time
hearing what we had to say.
Reminds me of the time they tried to do an unlicensed remake of For Your Eyes Only.
Oh,
Yeah.
no kidding. Yeah. Oh, well, soon, Bond will be in the open public domain.
Oh, yeah.
10 years, right? Boom.
I think so. Like at least the Fleming books.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to be, but of course it's like the gun barrel, certain elements that are in the film aren't going to be, but it's Steamboat Willie all over again.
All the stuff they couldn't do and Never Say Never Again.
Yeah.
Gee,
All
I
right.
wonder why that was.
George Lazenby's portrayal of James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service is often overlooked and sometimes downplayed. But there are compelling reasons why he deserves more credit. And we will touch on some of this. Mike Reyes just wrote an article on George's retirement, and we want to talk a little bit about that and then talk about why On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a damn good movie.
Wow, you didn't do your research and have me pegged for this at all. No, sir. I have not written at this subject on length, not at all. Yeah, I mean, just a quick agreement with all that you said there. George Lazenby is definitely underrated in his tenure, and just as my father had raised me with a healthy appreciation for this film, he also sort of gave me a little bit of wisdom when it came to looking at franchises, because he's like, if he at least did one more movie, we could have said more about what his Bond was like, or at least two more movies. And that's something that even Lazenby himself has sadly, reflected on. And he's like, I wish I'd done one more just to show them I could have done it. But like any character, like you look at Batman, you look at any of these pop culture characters that get recast frequently, it just gets to a point where the mythos overshadows the man.
Yeah.
And even with that, I think it's easy to look at George's performance and look at On Her Majesty's Secret Service as something that is one of the best, if not the best, classic Bond movie. And you also need not look any further than the DNA that would be appropriated by other entries along the way in the classic canon. Even Daniel Craig's tenure tipped its hat in a big way.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, right.
Well, and it's not just Bond. I mean, if you think about it, he was one of the first major characters that they just swapped out the actor. And that's not something you really had seen, or at least much at all, before this movie and George coming in and doing this.
I mean, you mentioned Daniel Craig. Well, the No Time to Die, Cary Fukunaga, when he finally saw On Her Majesty's Secret Service, right? He said, I was blown away by that. That's why there's so many callbacks to that in No Time to Die. So George had a big impact, and the whole film had a big impact on the Bond franchise. There's no question.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was delighted to hear that from Carrie when I did the rounds for No Time to Die, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, I saw that," and it's just everybody. There's so many people that are discovering this movie still,
Yeah,
and I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to call it underrated just because of the healthy appreciation it's gotten.
yeah, I think you're right. I mean, more and more people are discovering it and thinking, this is a good movie.
Maybe we have to change it to initially underrated.
Yeah. Number one, it's a great story. And number two, all the critics of George in this, we're going to talk about this because I think that is overrated. The critique of George is overrated.
I think the critique is overrated. And also, I love his origin story when it comes to this role.
Yes.
Yeah. He did have an audacious ascent to the role of James Bond. Why don't you tell that a little bit, just a little briefly, Michael? I know you wrote about it too, and it's a great story.
And also, I highly recommend watching the Hulu original "Becoming Bond."
Becoming Bond,
yeah, which is fantastic.
To have George Lazenby to narrate his own life story, and then also reenactments with a surprising bench of celebrity guests.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
I think I remember Dana Carvey being in there as
Dana Carvey was in there. Jeff Garland was in there.
Yep, he was Cubby Broccoli.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gene Seymour.
Yes, Jane Seymour was in there.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And you hear him tell the story, like you said, and getting teary-eyed sometimes when he was talking about some of the things he did. And he said it wouldn't change things, but I think going back, he may go back and he would have changed maybe one or two things. But yeah, go ahead. It's fantastic how he got to the job of James.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're looking at this and it's okay. You take yourself back to late 1960s. On Her Majesty's Secret Service would eventually come out in 69. 67 marked You Only Live Twice, which Sean Connery publicly said he was not doing anymore because he didn't feel like he was being paid properly.
Yeah.
And when you look at this in modern movie terms, it's like, okay, Iron Man stepping out. Who do we get to play Iron Man in these next couple Iron Man movies?
Yep.
As if the Marvel Cinematic Universe was just going to do Iron Man.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was something that was really exciting. That lens was exciting to apply to this whole franchise when rewatching them again during the early days of the pandemic, because I went through all of them in like a row in 2020. Mm-hmm. And just thinking of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it's like, okay, this is a cash cow. It's the biscuit train with gravy wheels. How do we keep it moving?
Yep.
And there were so many other names that were in the hat for this. I mean, this was Timothy Dalton's first time being asked, but he felt he was too young. I think they were rethinking Roger Moore at this point. If not, they definitely would after, obviously, because he was one of the first they were thinking of.
Yep.
And then out of nowhere, George Lazenby, this Australian model with no acting, no formal acting experience, goes and sneaks his way into a meeting with Albert Broccoli, better known to some people as Cubby Broccoli, and basically convinces him, yeah, you're the next Bond. And he nabbed a suit of Sean Connery's that was like cut for him, but he never picked up. He went and got his haircut at the Dorchester, the same place that Connery did. He got the Rolex. Like, he basically cosplayed James Bond in front of the producer. And he was like, you know what? We want this guy.
Yep.
Yeah, this is one feller bolder than a lot of the other fellers who played James Bond.
Well, and I love in Becoming Bond when he goes through that sequence. And, so he's talking about it, and then they've got the action behind him and the action going on. But, it's like he goes in the store. Connery didn't pick up a suit, so George just grabs it. And what I love is it fit him.
Yeah.
I mean,
at least it fit him enough.
He had a tailor. He did have a tailor.
Yeah.
Oh, true. I was going to say at least it fit him enough for that meeting.
Yeah.
But you want to talk about an actor who has possibly the most James Bond-esque story about becoming James Bond.
Yep.
Like, That's it right there. That's it. That's using intel. That's using a disguise. That's persuasion. That's everything that you would see in a classic Bond caper.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
punching the stunt coordinator in the face didn't hurt.
Oh, well, hurt him.
Yeah, they loved him after that. It's like, yeah, you're a good action guy. We like it. It's good.
You don't
Yeah.
pull your punches.
And Peter Hunt saying, damn, you fooled the two of the most vicious guys in the world. You're not an actor? Yes, you are.
Well, it's that rugged Australian upbringing that definitely gave George that leg up. And
Yeah, yeah.
even just looking at the origin of his life, the fact that he was born with I believe it was a heart defect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his doctors were
Or
like,
kidney. I think maybe kidney.
Yeah, it was kidney.
No, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right.
it
Kidney.
was.
And it was,
Yeah, yeah.
he was born with a congenital defect. And it's like, he's not gonna, I wouldn't be holding your breath for him lasting it like past 10, or I forget what age they put out
10
there.
or 12 or something like that. Yeah.
And it was like Bobby Darin all over again, where it's like, okay, like right from the beginning, it's kind of his birthright, where it's like, make the most of everything. You don't know how long you're here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he did.
Yeah. To be able to say at 84 that he's bowing out of public life on his own terms, he's going to go enjoy his family. It's like, you know what? That's well earned.
Well, it's also him. It's on his own terms.
Yes.
Right.
I think he would have it no other way.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get an interview with him, but
And you didn't either, Mike. Right? We all
I'm on
wanted
this-
to.
Yeah.
Didn't get an interview with him, and I didn't get to. I didn't get one of his signed photos, and I know they're selling out now.
yeah, you
I
can
have
still-
one of his. Anders has some, I think. Still has some. I got one from Anders once. And but we wanted to talk to George. Everybody wanted to talk to George. He actually responded in one of the social medias to me on a personal message saying, I don't do podcasts. I don't like podcasts.
George, that's George in a nutshell.
Yep. And I think actually on GeorgeLazenbyOfficial.com, I think there are still some autographs available. Not a lot, but there are some. Some of the pictures are sold out, but there's
He's not signing anymore, he said.
No.
So that's it.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Honor Majesty's Secret Service, because obviously he had a lot to do with that. But the story itself is a dang good story, right? The film is one of the finest James Bond installments, I think, to date. And it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's becoming more and more popular and more on people's top 5 lists. So Lazenby's performance in it was, I thought, just fine. So many people dismissed Lazenby as Bond because they said he turned in a weak acting role. And I don't get it. So I asked people directly when they say that, give me 2 or 3 examples from a film where he was bad. No, just in general he was bad. I think, no, that's no good.
yeah.
Tell me where he was bad.
Yeah.
And really, you go through the whole movie, and he's pretty darn good in the whole movie. I think he's good. What do you think, Mike?
I mean, Tom, unless you want to, you're going to counter some here and play devil's advocate.
No, I'm not.
No, I totally agree. I mean, again, when you look at the context, a male model with no formal acting training, no formal acting experience. This is his first film. He's being thrown into the role of James Bond, and he's been very public about how much pressure that put on him at that point.
Yeah.
And yet to have all of that piled onto him, and he puts in this good of a performance. Again, if he had done 2 or 3 more after this, we would be able to say, okay, or like we could take a look at him more like a Roger Moore, where it's like, okay, Roger Moore's Bond was more jokey. He wasn't the stone cold killer. But you know something? I appreciate X, Y, and Z. And did you know that For Your Eyes Only is his most underrated? Like, if you have that breadth to talk about, that's fine. But they're not giving like, what's the comparison? Like, oh, George Lazenby was weak. It's like, are you comparing him to Connery beforehand? Are you comparing him to those that came after? What are you comparing him to? This was the Bond that gave us something that we didn't know existed, and was also heralded as one of the most faithful adaptations of Ian Fleming's original texts.
Yeah, I thought he brought a certain. It was really more of an. He had charm, and he had toughness, obvious toughness, and he brought all of that to the role. And I thought he also brought that emotional depth that we really didn't see from the Connery era. I mean, we saw some emotional stuff with Connery, like when Coral got killed or stuff like that, when Tilly Masterson got killed, but not to the depth of this. And
well, I'm gonna play devil's
good.
advocate here a little bit, Dan. In Connery's defense, there is
He didn't defend Connery.
he didn't have his wife die, right?
Yeah,
so
right, that's true.
That scene. Now, and I'm not saying that George didn't do that great. I think he did a great job with it. But Connery's emotional scenes that he was given were not anywhere close to the emotion of what that scene required.
Yeah, and that's part of the writing. I agree, though. That's part of the writing. And so, hey, Connery did what the script said, right? But George they developed the character here in On Her Majesty's Secret Service to include this depth of emotion, and he played it off.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Right. I really do wonder if they were trying to give Connery that arc, because there's all this talk about how Joanna Maybaum and the original writers of the Bond films had intended for Sylvia Trench to be a through line as Bond's girlfriend through those movies. So I'm wondering if maybe there was, to a degree, some sort of plan where it's like, okay, Sylvia is his like steady girlfriend, they get married, and then she's the one that sort of gets the axe. But then when Connery left, well, first of all, Sylvia Trench wasn't built into the movies like that. Like after
she made 2 movies.
after From Russia with Love, Eunice Gay was gone. And then when Connery leaves, it's like, okay, well, that kind of screws our plan. What are we going to do? And then it's like, okay, that's a perfect time to introduce a new actor. Yeah. And it's like a soft reboot where we're not forgetting the past, but it's like we're starting a new chapter here.
Yeah.
And I mean, you even look at Diamonds Are Forever and the opening where it's like, oh, well, we're not really paying attention to what happened before, but that had to have been something along the lines of, well, our plans are done again.
Yeah.
I guess we're just going to ask Sean, maybe if we pay him enough, he'll come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, George stepping in after Connery, anybody stepping in after Connery is going to have a rough time.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And have tough critics, because that's what it is. But I think even Variety at the time said some really nice things about George, saying he was a pleasant and capable and good at the role of Bond. So, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the worst that they have to say, that publication has to say, stepping in after Connery, that's something.
Yes.
But I mean, if there was a word that could ever sum up this film, it's experimental. You go back to the opening title, the opening titles, and John Barry has a wordless, instrumental, very synth heavy, driving tune that opens the movie. And by this point, Goldfinger was the one that really hammered it all in, where it's like you have the Bond song, the Bond titles, the Bond singer.
That was the formula, yeah.
Yeah, and they were already at this early point in the game saying, let's tweak it a little bit. He, to a certain extent, they gave him more Bond girls, but at the same time, a bigger attachment to the central Bond girl in Tracy, played by the legendary Diana Rigg.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Oh,
I was saying,
and then go on. Oh, just to give a Bond girl that much agency as a character, especially when she's in that wonderful scene with Telly Savalas, who is hands down my favorite Blofeld.
Yeah. See,
just
good. I'm glad you said that. I love them as Blofeld.
There is just so much that they're doing right in these big swings. I mean, as we're recording this, Alien Romulus is about to go to theaters, and people have been talking about the ending to that film, where it's a big swing and it's divisive with what that big swing has done. I went and saw it myself last night, and I can see why. But that's something that we're so ingrained with. It's so ingrained in fan culture now. And you go back to 1969, and there were very few, if any, franchises that were doing what Bond was trying to do.
Right.
And would go on to do for as long as it has. So this was still sort of terra incognito for anyone.
Yep. Well, one thing you talked about the opening and the music. One thing I thought I really liked that they did in that with him was when we first saw Sean Connery's Bond, he's lighting a cigarette. You don't see his. I mean, it comes up to his face when he says his name, but that whole
Don't
thing
know
is
who he is at the moment. Yeah.
we don't know who he is in the moment. And it's the same thing at the opening of Majesty's, and so it's this delayed acknowledgement of who the actor is going to be. And
Yeah.
I just think that's really, really cool the way they did that. And the fact that they took that forward into On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, even down to the triple band cigarettes. I mean,
Yeah.
very, very cool.
Oh yeah.
And
Because
he
that was
played it off. That was a great pre-title sequence in On Her Majesty's, right? I mean, that was a fantastic pre-title sequence.
Yeah.
One of my favorites in all time. It was
I can't think of an aspect of this. Well, there's one thing about this movie I would criticize, but it's for obvious reasons. But as on the whole, I can think of very few things to criticize this movie about with how it handled Bond and how it reintroduced him while also keeping things very comfortable in that same sort of milieu that they had built up.
Yeah.
Well, what did you think of the that never happened line?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, me too.
It's a little bit of cheek where it's like that's like even if you just take the real life context out of it, it's like that's Bond would say that.
Yeah. Yeah, he would. And to me, it was also Lazenby would say that too. I thought that was very fitting for him.
If you're ever going to break a fourth wall in the Bond movies, that was the perfect time to do it. And he just does it so well. He looks right in the camera. It's like, it never happened to the other fella.
To the point where you have people saying, oh, why don't we open Bond 26 by negating like a little joke that negates, oh yeah, didn't Bond just die? And it's something like, if they hadn't already used the line like resurrection is my hobby, like something like that in Skyfall, that would have been great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? In fiction, anything can happen, right, Mike? You could just write it and it's done. Bond is alive again. All I have to do is write it.
Yeah, and it's just we know it's going to happen, and you don't even need to acknowledge it. The point, everyone knows that even in a soft continuity, like the classic 20 film run was, before they even decided to reboot with Casino Royale, you had an acknowledgement that it's something different. This is a different chapter, a different era. What's this Bond gonna be like? What's this Timothy Dalton guy gonna be like in the Living Daylights?
Yeah.
Ooh. And again, it's like that was something that made the On Her Majesty's Secret Service opening a hallmark of the series, because you have that wonderful sequence where there's other actors that deliberately look like past Bonds.
Yes.
And then that wonderful shot where it's like Dalton, hair swept, looking over an alert. And it's like, oh, well, now we are officially welcomed.
Yeah. And I think they did the same thing here. When they introduced them, I thought it was a great introduction. And well, could he have had a stronger pre-title sequence and our introduction to Bond than that? The whole beach scene, fighting on the beach, saving Tracy from the water. I mean, this is the kind of stuff Bond would do, right? You expect, hey, I'm going to go save this woman. And then people are fighting him. I'll take care of these guys. And he was great at it. So I thought it was a great introduction. And then, his line, my name is Bond, James Bond, talking to Tracy when she's waking up. Fantastic intro. So all you people out there who think George was no good, I'm sorry to say, you're wrong.
Stop it. Stop it now. It's done. We're coming up on 55 years of this movie in December. The case is closed.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
It's just it's an all-timer.
Yeah.
It seriously is an all-timer, and that's a reason why it gets so referenced so much throughout the series, is because Bond at his best is dangerous, is wounded, has emotional scars from the past, even though they don't play it up as much in the classic films, that he lost his parents and was an orphan and went to boarding school and left on mysterious circumstances. Like, this man, I don't think people take the hallmarks of the series properly because of that. It's like he was it came from a good background, but eventually became a poor orphan who had to fight for everything. That's why he was perfect for clandestine service. That's why he lives life the way he does and maxes out his expense accounting, gives himself the finest things, because he comforts himself in the only way that he knows, the comforts of the modern man. When he allows himself to be vulnerable, it gets dangerous.
He was always a very strong and suave persona, the guy in Bond, right? Always. But we know deep down, hey, he's a human being. We'd like to think he was our hero. And even though I think Fleming at one point said, no, he wasn't a hero. But, we kind of think, hey, he's our hero. He certainly did a lot for the British at the time when they needed a little pump up after World War II and so on.
Oh, yeah.
But he's a human being and he's vulnerable. And, you look at all the heroes on TV or movies, a lot of them wore masks, right? The Lone Ranger, Zorro, the Green Hornet,
The Shadow.
Batman and Robin, all these guys, they had masks. But there's been a virtual mask, I think, on Bond all this time. And it's a mask of control, that he's always in control, that he'll figure out a way out of situations. He'll always figure this out, and that this is the mask of control. And I think here in the final scene of the movie with George and on Her Majesty's Secret Service, that mask kind of slips away, and we see the vulnerability of Bond really for the first fundamental time that they're showing us. And it was a great moment in the James Bond cinematic history. And it's fantastic. This is a powerful scene, and Lazenby played it off perfectly. Perfectly.
Well, yeah, to the point where there's a version we haven't seen where he actually cried during a take. And Peter Hunt was like, no, Bodden wouldn't do that. And just wanted him to reel it back in because I think he thought he was too emotional in the scene. And it's like,
yeah,
his wife just died.
Yeah, exactly.
Emotional about.
Exactly.
And then the one thing I'll criticize the movie about is the fact that you go from that heartbreaking line. It's like, she's just having a rest. Actually, we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to that bullet hole in the windshield. And then you hear that the soft strings doing, we have all the time in the world. And it's like, you're really in that moment. And then 2 seconds later, we're back to the Bond theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that theme. It's a wonderful theme.
But it did smash the moment.
But that was not the moment to go into it. And
they could have played that off better.
Yeah.
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 And like, why not have, I know there were supposed to be, and I don't think they were ever released, lyrics to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I know there's been some theorized lyrics and they sounded like they fit perfectly. Why not have a soft, somber ballad version of that at the end?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would have been a better musical end than what they did.
Yeah.
You're right. And that is a good critique. They could have made that better.
Yeah, but that's not George Lazenby's fault.
No,
not George's fault. And you look at the adherence to the Fleming novel, and it's that and Casino Royale are probably the closest of keeping to what Fleming wrote, and that was good.
Yeah,
and one of our favorite Bond movies ever.
Yeah, one of the things I want to go back to, Dan, you were talking about the control and then the mask coming down, and what I really like about that is you had George at the beginning of this thing, and he was in control. It's like, I'm getting out here, I'm going to go save this lady, and he's totally in control. And then, again, as the character evolves and as George's portrayal of him evolves and the story evolves, he softens up a bit, which was kind of nice, because you got this, I don't know if it's roller coaster or whatever, this wave how the character goes, and George is able to play with that amazingly well, especially for a guy who didn't have acting experience.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's one really good moment is when the hypnosis process is starting and he's in bed with Ruby, and the genuine concern he's showing is like, Ruby, wake up. It's like, you could tie that back to Goldfinger, where it's like, oh no, please, no, don't let that, like, she's this sweet, innocent young woman who just wants to have fun and wants to cure her allergies. And then he just has that was another sort of evolution of Bond in that moment. It's like, he's not just seeing these women as disposable pleasures. I mean, he's certainly having fun, but he didn't want to die.
Yeah, and he has a history of trying to save the woman, right? I mean, he did it in Dr. No with Honey Rider, and he's doing it in many movies where he tries to save the woman at the end. He doesn't have to, but that is part of the Bond experience and part of the Bond culture. And he does it a few times here too. And, Tracy, he loses out. Again, if he hadn't wooed Tracy and married Tracy, she would still be alive. Or maybe she would have killed herself in the pre-title sequence. I don't know, but a lot of the times the involvement Bond has with women sometimes ends tragically, and this one is tremendously tragic. Now, when you go visit these locations, and Tom and I have been to Portugal, we've been to all of the filming locations for this movie in Portugal, and we got into the wedding scene of the mansion, the courtyard. We weren't supposed to be there, but we somehow we got in, and we had we went in. We drove down this road, and it was the wrong road. Then there was a bridge that was out, and we couldn't get into the property. We had Google Maps from the air and everything. We had, okay, don't you think this is it? And this Portuguese guy was driving out, and we asked him. He didn't speak English. We can't speak Portuguese. Portuguese is like a very tough language. It's like a mix of 5 languages. It's like, yeah, we're drawing on the dirt. And he's like, oh, okay. And he basically followed me. We followed him in. We got into the thing, and we drove up there, and there's the house. It's like, oh my God, there's the house. And we go in, and one guy's there on the truck. He's like, what are you guys doing here? He's like, well, we're Bond fans. We just want to go to. He said, all right, don't go in the gate, because they had a gate there. Now they didn't have a gate in the movie. You can take pictures from the gate. So we're at the gate taking pictures. These dogs run out and are barking. We go, ooh, but they were little dogs, so we weren't afraid. And then this other young guy comes out, and he says, what's going on here, guys? And he's like, oh, that guy over there. Oh, and the guy's gone. He's like, oh, okay. And he's like, well, what? And we had photos with us. So we said, we're Bond fans. We just, and he said, oh, my grandmother was in the movie. She was one of the servants in the house, and they actually used the servants. And he's looking in our photos. We had, snapshots with us, boom, printed. And he's like, she's not in this, but come on in. And we're walking all over the grounds, the steps, around the back where the real fountain is now. They moved it around the back, and we're
it was awesome.
The place. It was fantastic.
Well, then he
private
said,
property.
Then he said, yeah, now if you drive down this road, you'll get to the bull ring.
Yes.
So we went to the bull ring by ourselves. Yep. It was just Dan and I, and there was a bowl and a pen, not in the ring, but
yeah, we were standing in the bull ring. We went up on the top where the party was. We're standing right where Bond and Draco are talking. Where Draco says, I could see she really loves you. And he says, you must give me the name of your Oculus. We're standing right there. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you slipped someone a couple units of local currency, you could have gotten that bull out of that pen.
We don't want to.
I wouldn't have wanted to.
But then George went back, right? A couple of years ago, George went back with Terrence Mountain, who was in the movie as well. And they were back on that beach in the Guincho Beach in Portugal. That
was part of the On the Tracks of 007 50th anniversary thing.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And he went back there. So that was kind of cool. And they redid their fight on the beach. Terrence Mountain was one of the guys. He was Raphael on the beach fighting them in the movie, and they redid it. And we interviewed Terrence Mountain, and he said I could still take him.
Yeah. Well, just bringing up that whole sort of personal connection, when I found out about George Lazenby retiring, I was coming home from a recent trip I had done to London for business, and part of that trip, on my list stuff that I planned that I'm going to be reporting on it soon is I went to Duke's Bar and had that experience. I popped into the Aston Martin House of Q experience that they had over there, and that it looked cool. Not a lot to report on, but they had like the Goldfinger script in a case. Part of the whole thing was they were celebrating Goldfinger's 60th this year.
Yeah.
Hearing that news as I was coming home was like, oh, it was so bittersweet because, again, as we had both discussed, is like I would have loved to have talked to George and just talked to him about his experience and tried to find some other way or some other angle that Becoming Bond didn't cover. I still think that is a touchstone for just Lazenby's involvement, and Josh Greenbaum did an amazing job.
Well, what I love is when they ask him, was this real? or I forget how he phrased it, but he was kind of like, is everything you just told me true? It's kind of a crazy story from the beginning all the way up until the point he becomes Bond. That his whole life is just kind of insane.
He said, how could I remember it if it wasn't true? He said something like that. But that was Duke's Bar. Tom and I were there too. We were with Caroline Monroe there. At Duke's Bar drinking investment martinis. Well, Alessandro, I think. Alexandro or Alessandro? Alessandro. Yeah. He's fantastic.
That's a great place to get a drink.
Oh yeah. I ran into two other Americans there, and we were having fun.
I think that would be, the ultimate interview with George would be sitting in a bar with him, drinking cocktails,
sitting up in Peace Gloria,
recording.
Sitting up in Peace Gloria, having a drink with him.
Yeah.
Yes. That is a place I still need to get to.
Yeah, Tom and I've been there. It's fantastic. It's got to be one of the top 5 Bond filming locations.
Oh yeah.
Well, and the town of Murin, where you get the ride up, the gondola up, is from Murin, and that's where they were all staying. And on the 50th, I guess George was holding court in the bar there. They were just talking and drinking and just having a great time with everybody.
What a character, George. George was a character, always refreshing to hear him talk. That's why it's so disappointing that he's not going to do it anymore. Because anytime you saw him on interviews, you saw him on a show, you saw him at these events and stuff, and you saw the videos of it, whatever, you just listened. You had to listen to him because he has such a compelling story. It does change once in a while, but
which one?
Whose doesn't?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And in the Becoming Bond thing, he said, I may not be good, but I'm original. And I loved when they asked him, what would you like to be remembered for? And he said, you can defy what is expected of you and write your own story. And that's him.
That's George Lazenby.
His whole life.
To a nutshell.
Definitely. I mean, right down to turning down an extended deal to be Bond because of all the pressures that had fallen on him with the role. And then, of course, Ronan O'Reilly is like, no, this Bond's passe. You could be making spaghetti westerns and, really digging into the counter.
His manager, right? Yeah, his manager, right, Mike? Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, it's like, this is hippie times. Tuxedos, those guys are out, Yikes.
Might have made a mistake there.
But the silver lining of it all is the stories that George has had to tell. And ones that he really doesn't seem to look back in anger, so to speak. Like he understands his own egoism at the time, his own drive, the factors that made him make those decisions. Like he's not one of those people that looks back and is like, oh, those bloody Bond movies, they took it out of me. It's like, no, he had fun, and like just the regret where he's like, I wish I would have done one more to show them I could do it.
Right.
And since I repeated that whole thing, I wanted to ask you both, what Bond movie would you have most wanted to see George Lazenby follow things up with? Like out of the ones that followed, which one do you think was the biggest missed opportunity for him to jump back in?
I think For Your Eyes Only, he would have been terrific in For Your Eyes Only. That
should have been the follow-up right now that you mention it. It's like after that.
Right.
Not Diamonds Are Forever. Just
no.
For Your Eyes Only.
Yeah.
They wrote it.
That would have been powerful.
Who knows if they would have wrote it the same way if they had made it in 71 versus making it in 81.
Right.
81.
Yeah. Right. No, I like that choice. Because that would seem to fit him.
Boy, that would have been a powerful 1-2 punch.
Yeah. And that talk about mythic, because if he had made that would have been another sacred text if things did shake out the way they did, because Quantum of Solace owes a lot to For Your Eyes Only. And I mean that sincerely and in a good way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was one of Roger Moore's best, but that would have been a great follow-up for George.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now, one that I don't think would have been a good follow-up would have been Live and Let Die for him. I don't think that would have worked for him. Right?
He may have a hard time playing that one off.
I think that would have worked for very few people. Yeah. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those. I like the movie. It's just I can't see George in that in Bond in that role.
Yeah, like
I seem to remember you had written that they were talking that it was going to be Man with the Golden Gun after Majesty's. I thought I read that, and that was in one of your articles.
I'm gonna have to look that up again. I wouldn't be surprised. Like,
Yeah.
I know that some people like to say that it would have been Diamonds Are Forever that automatically popped up, but I think that's just because of the opening that was written, and everyone thinks, oh, that was obviously meant to be for George, but since Sean's back, we have to tweak it a little bit. Where's Blofeld?
Yeah.
Like, just 5 minutes of people getting their asses handed to them being asked where Blofeld is.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's like at that point, Charles Gray's just standing in his legs like, I didn't know you thought so highly of me,
Yeah.
All good stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, so Mike, as we come to the end of this discussion, and I love what you wrote about this, how do you want to wrap up how we think of the George Lazenby James Bond, his career, and what he meant to the character?
To sort of adapt a common adage, he wasn't there for a long time, but he was there for a good time. George Lazenby means more to this saga than most people would give him credit for, except for people that are diehard fans like us that can connect the dots. And you go to For Your Eyes Only, you go to License to Kill, you go to Tomorrow Never Dies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even like the sly reference in GoldenEye where Alec is talking to Bond about like trying to drown the screams of the women that he failed to save.
Yes.
And then, of course, just writ large throughout Daniel Craig's era,
Yes.
George Lazenby's Bond was a stepping stone that helped keep this series alive because it allowed other experimental, jokey things to happen. And he will always be important and just an icon to me for this.
Hey, all right, that's a wrap. We want to wish George Lazenby the best in his retirement, and we'll always love you, George, as Bond, James Bond. This has been Dan and Tom on our podcast, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Subscribe now and check out our fun website, spymovienavigator.com as well. And we want to thank Mike Reyes again for joining us. It's always fun, Mike, to have you with us.
Well, Mike says it's a very big treat to have been on with you guys again, and just, it's never a dull moment. It's never rigid and structured. Like, I like that we just go off on tangents. We tell each other stories. Yeah. I am honored to be back. I'm honored to be tipping my own hat to George Lazenby, and I look forward to our next chat.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate you spending time with us.